All right, I'm a bit late catching this game, but let's think about it. We know Vid is the pink cards and Turdz is the blue. It is 5-5. Turdz goes in 4 with a same. He does not save that same for later. So if he could have slid in 6, my inclination would be to slide in 6. The thing is, if you go in 4, you are intending to go in 6. If you start in a corner, you're intending to go in the far side. Like if you start in 1, they go in 4, you're going to have to play 6. If you start in a side, however, you also usually intend to go in the far side when you're the second turn player. If you go in 4 and they go in 1, you can't play 9. You're just going to lose if they've taken anything. Or you likely can't plan to play 9. Occasionally, depending on what they can take, you can play it out to there. But the game plan is never go 9. Let's see what the stips are. That's going to be important here. Round 4. This is closed level 7. Wait. What? Is this TTAC? Am I on the wrong TTAC? I think I'm on the wrong TTAC. TTAC 15. Yes, this wasn't TTAC 15. Great work by me. Alright, TTAC 16 rules. Okay, round 4. It's loading. We'll probably have the result by then. Level 7, SPPWC. No 886s or 8764s. So the only 886s are the 1686 type things. Max of 2 8-8 corners. We see an 8-8 corner coming out by Vid there, though they might not run any. Max of 2 8665s or 8664s. No rares. Okay. Turdz won. Congrats to Turdz. What happened? That 6468 for Vid blanked at the end because it couldn't flip the 6. So if Turdz had been comboed, he loses there because it flips through 3 cards. If he is flipped, he ties. Yeah. Okay. Trying to work out a little of what happened over the game. But you can see Turdz had 4 and 6. And the question was, how does he sequence them? If you go 4, 7 was already Turdz's, so you don't combo through to flip 8. But if you go in 6, you do combo through 3 to flip 2, which is why Turdz started in 4 and then went in 6. Now, I think this is the game Vid most needed to win in the matchup. First of all, he had first turn, and first turn is, of course, good and closed. But second of all, Vid is an absolutely fantastic closed hand player. We have lots of historical evidence of this. Turdz, I'm sure, is very strong here as well. But this has been a huge strength of Vid's. And yeah, one I've consistently been very impressed by. So, Turdz getting this win, when I think Turdz is the favorite in open games, though Vid can certainly win those. It's kind of cool. We now have a few open finals games on record. We have Carver, which was a really good match between Vialva and Turdz. Game 1 of that match was fantastic. And then we have Nephilim. We have various of the random tournaments, but even just including hand ones. We have Triad Wars 14, 15, 16. We have TTAC 14, 15, and soon to be 16. And we have SE Ultimecia and SE Nephilim. Maybe I'm forgetting something. We also have the Kefkas, the Cosmoses of the world. But we have 2 historical finals and 2 historical finals only. And our 2 historical finals are 1, because Vid wrote an article that included it, we have the game I beat MC in the finals of SE Rufus, which is a good game. Very good game. But we also, because Vid had a screenshot and was able to reconstruct it, we have the finals of his win in SE Nanaki over Nightwish, and that is a way cooler game. And I think that's still the coolest finals we have on record, and it really shows Vid's ability to find just wild combo potential out of not innocuous, but out of not combo filled positions. And so he certainly still very much has a chance, but I would have. I mean, Turdz is very good in this format. Turdz is going to be very good in open and closed, but I would have generally leaned Vid's advantage is in the closed, and Turdz's advantage is in the open. And if Turdz can grab the closed game on second turn, Turdz is quite likely to make the finals. Because in general, anytime, and you see this a lot, like, how is Delhi most likely to lose in TTAC? Get double closed. Lose the closed, and the open closed flips closed, and he loses that too. Or Seto or whoever, right? Insert whoever. And in general, the closed is what gives the underdog a somewhat bigger chance. And Vid is something of an underdog. Not like a huge underdog, but something of an underdog. But Vid also has a real strength for closed. It's not just anyone can spike a closed game, which is certainly true. It's that Vid is a uniquely talented closed player. Sorry I didn't have much to say about that game. I do not know if they're going to be playing again. It's possible that was the only game we're getting. So I'm going to pause the video. If we see Turdz start playing closed, I guess it's over. I don't know that there's much more to take from it. From the hands, we know they both use 6-4, 6-8. I'm going to guess. So 4-4-8-7 was under Turdz's control. Under Vid's control at the first time we looked. The initial position we saw, 4-4-8-7 was Vid's, and no card played at that point could have flipped it. The only thing touching it was 2. 2 could not flip it. So we know 4-4-8-7 came from Vid's hand. We also know that 8-7-3-5 came from Vid's hand, because while 4-6-8-6 could have flipped it, it hadn't. So we know 4-6-8-6 was in Turdz's hand, and we know 8-7-3-5 and 4-4-8-7 were in Vid's hand. Now it could have been that Turdz played 7-5-4-7, and Vid flipped it with 5-7-5-7. No, it couldn't, because 7-5-4-7 was Turdz's, so it must have been played after the other two cards were played. So we know that Vid had 5-7-5-7, 4-4-8-7, 8-7-3-5. That makes it very likely that Vid started with 5-7-5-7 and 5, Turdz played a weak corner in 7, and Vid played 4-4-8-7 and 3, setting up 6-4-6-8 to have both sides. I think this checks out. Yeah, so I think the move order was 5-7-3, 2-8, 4-1-6-9. I think that's very likely. Now, we don't know what Turdz's last card was, but that means we do know Vid's entire hand. So he had 4-4-8-7 and 8-7-3-5 as non-symmetrical corners working around his 5-7-5-7, and he had 6-4-6-8 and 3-8-8-5 as non-symmetrical power cards that could work in the other corners. He started with a 5-starter of 5-7-5-7. 5-7-5-7 is often a very powerful sweeper, but it can also be a good starter, and here it turns out it didn't actually have that many targets to sweep. Turdz goes in 7, setting up a same in 4, and we don't know if he had anything special for 8. He may have just wanted the same in 4. Vid goes in 3, setting up 6-4-6-8 both ways. This makes sense. I've talked about how if you're not happy with your plays in 4 or 8, then I don't like going for the slash, which Vid went for. But with Turdz playing a weak corner, there's almost no chance Vid is all that unhappy about his play in 4 and 8. Here it turned out not to be great. He kind of 6-4-6-8 is his only real card for 8, and 3-8-8-5 is kind of his only card for 4. But that's weird circumstances that you don't have too much control over. and you're not going to be setting out much further. So, okay, 4, 4, 8, 7, and 3 makes sense. Turdz now goes 7, 5, 4, 7, and 2. Your vid. Turdz is saying he has a threat in 6. So you don't really want to go 1. Because A, Turdz might control 1, and it turns out he did with 8, 7, 4, 3. But B, I should check if there's another game happening, sorry. Okay, there is not. But B, Turdz might be able to meet that by going in 6 and comboing through and snagging some stuff. Though maybe you have combos back, but maybe you don't because your play in 4 and 8 are so bad that you don't really want to leave 4 and 8 open. So 1 seems uncomfortable to me. And 1 is not the standard move there. The standard thing there is to go for the Q in 8 or the Q in 6 or the Z in 8. Vid goes for the Z in 8. And he keeps 3, 8, 8, 5 and 6, 4, 6, 8, which are his cards for the 2 remaining corners. So it makes a lot of sense to leave those. 8, 7, 3, 5 is not a particularly good card in this endgame. So I guess the other option was 8, 7, 3, 5, and 6. But it does feel like Vid's cards just ended up not aligning at all, without it being obvious what he could have done all that differently. I think if Turdz had happened to go in 9 instead of 7, Vid's hand would have made more sense. But to me, this looks like a pretty reasonable game from Vid. Center starter, reasonable opposite corner setup. Not one of those perfect setups where everything's super clean, but very reasonable. Takes the Z that leaves him the 2 most useful cards for the endgame, and that endgame ends up being a loss. So really well done by Turdz, because it looks to me like Vid played an entirely reasonable game, and very much the level where you're going to win more than you tie, and tie about as much as you lose. So nicely done to win that by Turdz. From Turdz's perspective, we have a 5 starter is met with synergy rather than aiming for something challenging or something that determines the game will be up, down, or side to side. Turdz says, I'm not invested in that. I just want to have more synergy. When Vid plays in 3, Turdz slides, which I think is a good thing. He finds a way to slide to 5. He didn't have many options to do so. He needs 6, 4, 6, 8 to have at least one of 2 or 6. He needs 8, 7, 4, 3 for 4. So his only cards he can slide with are 7, 5, 4, 7, or whatever the last card in his hand is. Probably a corner card for 1, but it's not. No, he played 4, 6, 8, 6. I don't know what the last card in Turdz' hand was. Maybe a corner for 3? Maybe something neutral? I have no idea. No idea what Turdz' last card is, which is a good sign for Turdz' hand making, that I don't have a clear read on it. So presumably his last card was worse at sliding. And if it did slide, probably the square it could slide in was maybe 8. But there's a chance it had no way to slide. And if it could slide in 8, then maybe he doesn't want to because 4 is his best square. And if 4 is your best square and you have a choice between going in 2 or 8, if you go in 2, your opponent most likely goes for the Q or Z, so 6 or 8, and that leaves 4 open. If you go in 8, the most likely responses are 2 and 4 for the S or Q, and that has a much lower chance of leaving 4 open. So if 4 is your best square, you'd rather go 2. So I like Turdz going in 2. It doesn't so much matter whether he flips 3. Vid definitely can take 3 back. The important thing is being weak to 5 so he can set up various sliding. Yeah, I like how Vid played this game. I like corners in reply to center starters. I think corner with synergy as a reply to a center starter is my ideal reply to a center starter. And doing it with weak numbers facing out clearly did not come back to hurt Turdz at all, and it probably is just a good thing to do. Yeah, very good close game, I think. I suspect that's all we're getting. Looks like it. Good close game. Glad it was possible to reconstruct so I can pretend we analyzed the whole thing rather than just the end game. But actually meaning, because we could reconstruct it, we could think about it knowing more of what cards were available. Good game. Well played. worthy of a close game in the semifinals. All right, this is an addendum to the prior video. Sorry about the graphic quality. I know it'll come out worse, but we're looking back at the game. Vid sent me some comments he had on the game, so I wanted to add them and talk a little about them. So I don't have the image of his starter, but we know Vid started with 5-7, 5-7, and 5. And you can see that move here. And Vid's remaining cards are 4-4-8-7, 8-7-3-5, 6-4-6-8, and 3-8-8-5. So we are surrounding the center starter with 4 corners. We can see 4-4-8-7 has a plus wall in 6, 8-7-3-5 has a plus wall in 8, 3-8-5-5 has plus walls in both 2 and 4. His cards are not obvious because they are not direct pairs, but they all have synergy with the starter, and there are some setups. Okay, let's get to his comments though. So as for starters, slight issues. My hand was created more for the idea of going second with the 7-5-7-5-6-4-6-8 combination, trying to go for a surprise effect of having both of these side, especially left sweepers. 5 did turn out to be the horrific idea that I assumed it can become when playing Turdz. He led the game. He plays for either sames or pluses, but lower number pluses that don't allow combos in return. As an example, his unplayed 5-8-7-4 and 8 setup. So I didn't know what his last card was, but we will now look through the game, keeping in mind that Turdz' final card is 5-8-7-4, which I guess makes quite a bit of sense, but is not. I thought it was probably something for 1 or 3. You can rewind however long in the video. It was pretty recently, but I had no idea what it specifically was. We will get to that Vid Red turns his hand much better than I did. I did for a long time consider my 8-8 and 1. This is as starter. It had a lot of potential good replies, but also tons of bad ones. Unlikely, but possible. He attacks in 2. I do not have a recapture in 4. It is interesting that Vid, in a hand game where you can set things up, did consider playing a starter that he did not have full recaptures on. I think it is very unlikely Turdz attacks that immediately, so I think this is a gamble that isn't immediately punished, but that shouldn't lead us to immediately say we like it. Let's get to the rest of what he says here. Likely for Turdz. Adjacent corners. This is definitely likely with Turdz. Both could be very dangerous. 7, possibly more so than 3, like a 7 up and 7, blocks my recapture for 1 from 4. Meaning that if Turdz goes in 3, Vid potentially can go in 7 and set up a way to have a capture in 4. But if Turdz starts playing in the lower left quadrant of the board, Vid will never have an opportunity to set up. Hence, if Turdz plays in 7 and does not set up Vid's cards for him, Vid will never have 4. And I would also note, in general, I don't think he addresses this. I've only skimmed what he wrote so that I could be somewhat fresh with it. But whenever you play a strong corner, especially in a closed game where you can't work around stuff, but this is an open too, you need to be able to play next to it, in my opinion, in ways that don't get comboed through it. Because high numbers facing out means combos are much more likely, because A, opponents will have set up their hand to have those combos, and B, if they can capture, basically the only way they can capture is with those combos. So if they're capturing, they're comboing, and if they're comboing, it's flipping extra cards unless you have an equally high number facing towards it. Now, Vid's hand does have an 8 up and an 8 left, but if he goes 1 and Turdz goes 7, and he has to block 4, he has to do so with 8-7-3-5, and that's pretty limiting. Now, 8-7-3-5 is probably the card he's happiest to block with anyway, the least power and use in the game going forward, but it does seem to me a very limiting feature and a reason you'd want to avoid adjacent corners. And I might be actually more afraid, maybe not, because if Turdz goes 3, you can go 7 and suddenly you do have 4. If you have no way to set up 4, it's worse if your opponent plays the adjacent corner in 3, because you can't really block 4, you're just going to have trouble against 2. Your natural block is in 2, but you don't have 4. And they're going to have 4, so I'm uncomfortable with this kind of starter, but I can see why you'd consider it, and I think Vid is good at understanding what gambles he's taking in closed, and I am much worse at evaluating that. 3 would feel awkward either, but more of a I can still tie this feeling. 3 in response to the starter in 1 meaning. A 7 left, likely 8 down, in 3 means no setup for me in 2, but at least my recapture 1 from 2 is safe, meaning it has an 8 touching the 8 so that there's no combo potential. And possibly a PW in 6 with 6-4-6-8. Also could have allowed the 8-7-5-3 answer in 7, because 8-7-5-3 sets up 5-7-5-7 to have 4, and then you have 5-7-5-7 is both 2 and 4, and suddenly you're much happier. Unlikely from Turdz, opposite corner, but that may have been extremely nasty also. Didn't give it any thoughts during the game. Lastly, unlikely for Turdz, but could go well for me, a 5 setup. That could possibly allow me a setup in 7. 8x, 8x he probably didn't have, but there was 8-5-8-1. But why would he have it? There's an 8-6-8, I guess, but I believe Stips forbid it. So a left-sided game with my 7-5, 7-5, 6-4, 6-8, and 4-4, 7-8 would have been strong, but an unlikely scenario. One thing to note there is if Turdz sets up in 5, a lot of those moves will set up Vid to have 4. 4-4-8-7 gets the plus if there's an 8 left. 5-7-5-7 gets the plus if there's a 6 left. And 8-7-3-5 gets it if there's a 7 left. So anything 6, 7, or 8, suddenly Vid starts having recaptures. 6-4-6-8 never gets it. Anything 5 or lower he doesn't get. But there are things that can set Vid up there. Considered a few other moves. 5-7-5-7-9, 8-7-5-3-7, a few weak corners, but nothing that I could play off of. Yeah. It seems to me that the hand is intending to play 5-7-5-7 in 5. And you have some setups, like 8-7-3-5 and 9, suddenly 4-4-8-7 has both sides. There's the 4-4-8-7 and 3 that we saw, 6-4-6-8 has both sides. It seems to me that 5-7-5-7 is the right starter. I think Vid now considers it a mistake, but I mean, I like center starters in closed, I think, more than a lot of current strong closed players do, but I do not have a problem with this move. After his move in 7, I mistakenly focused on my own setup, rather than first trying to figure out what he's aiming for. The move in 3 seemed too obvious, so I considered little other ideas. Now, it could have been a nice chance to go 1, and get the left-sided game that I originally wanted all along, but it didn't quite work out either. If he were to block 4, I would still be stuck with 8-7-5-3 or 3-8-8-5. He can only play one of those in 1, and neither of them has recaptures in 2 or 8, which does nothing except possible end in 6 for a lane tilted T that didn't cause enough pressure though, so didn't calculate that too deeply, and rushed for the move in 3. Yeah. So if we think about Vid's remaining cards after the first 2 moves are played, he has 4 corners, but he doesn't really have any like up, down, or side to side preference. So it doesn't seem obvious to me that he like needs to go in 2 or 6 to force the game into upper side to side variation. Like if he plays 8-7-3-5 and 2, the 4-4-8-7 sees a lot of 7s, which it likes to see, but the rest of the hand is not so happy. I guess 3-8-8-5 is some nice play in 1 or 4. It's always going to have captures. So maybe 2 and you make it up down. But 6-4-6-8, 6-4-6-8 is not too unhappy with that. It just wants to land on the right side. Maybe 2 was the case. I don't have a problem with 3 either. I think Vid is being harsh on his own play, but I'm not sure. I don't see clearly better alternatives. After he went 2, so now the game has gone 5. Oops, sorry, that made it harder for you to see, not easier. 5-7-3-2. I knew he must have 5-8-7-4 left. So Vid correctly realized Turdz is playing 5-8-7-4. It's a card that is a natural pair with 7-5-4-7, and makes sense that Turdz would have set up in 7 the way he did, with 5-8-7-4 having the plus. So going 6 was a definite no. Yeah, if you go 6, you basically have to do it with 8-7-3-5 at this point to keep decent sweepers for the endgame. But 5-8-7-4 is going to land very annoyingly for you. All right, so you'd rather block 8 than 6? Yeah, I think he's right. I think the natural moves are 6 and 8. As I said in my earlier analysis, I think 1 is poor. There might be a case for going 9. Sometimes you can force out a continuation, but I don't think Vid has the cards to do so here. Because if you're going to go 9, you're trying to have a card for 6 and 8 and a card for 1 and 4. 3-8-8-5 has to be your card for 1 and 4. and either of the cards you put in 9, you're pretty unhappy to go in 8 after. So, yeah, I don't know. I think 8 seems reasonable. Um, he does talk 9 here. But anyways, so going 6 was a definite no. He'd block 4, force me in 1. Whatever I take in 1, he pluses back from 8 with said card. I don't combo back, I lose. 9 could have been possible-ish, but I didn't have any setups to take back my own card without being comboed to hell. Just likely leads to me being comboed. 4, well, could have worked, but I couldn't play off my own cards properly, so had to block 8 in hopes he couldn't combo from 6. 9 was unlikely for him to play. He had already played 7-5-4-7. The only other dangerous card for 9 was 6-6-5-8. So Vid is doing a nice job of checking the available cards. I think there were pretty limited decks, and this is the sign of a proper closed player, is noting limited decks means limited options, and I can figure out what possible cards my opponent has. But yeah, as I said, I think during my previous analysis, I think Vid played this game very well. I think sometimes you just lose in closed, even with first turn. 1 felt safe for me, 6 also. After he went 4, I assumed he might be faking it. He took too long for such an obvious setup, but had no other hopes anyway but go 1. Are there any other moves? No, your 6-4-6-8's dead in 1. So you'd have to keep 3-8-8-5, but that's dead on the right. Yeah, you have to go 1. The end. Rereading and fixing. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, I don't actually think I disagree with any decision Vid made. Now, that might mean both Vid and I are idiots. And you certainly could have played it differently, right? If Vid had played a weak corner, I might also not have an objection, and that might have happened to go better, but that would take a lot of long-term statistical analysis to show. I think is very unclear. Maybe a move in 2 instead of 3, but I don't. 3 is a natural setup. It's not like you need to get rid of squares or force the game left right in the way, or up down in the way 2 does, or left right in the way 6 does. Yeah, I think Vid played a good game. I think Turdz also played a very good game and got the win and earned it. But I don't think that means Vid went wrong here. And so I disagree with his analysis only insofar as he thinks he made some mistakes. I don't think he did. I think he played correctly and well. I think 8-7-3-5 and 8 was already the right move, just considering Vid's hand, but especially given that he made a read on Turd's hand, seems very clearly the right move. Yeah, just seems to me really hard to argue with anything Vid did this game, and I think his evaluations were just correct, except for him going, this was a mistake, which I just don't think it was. And I will note, when he says it was a mistake, he doesn't list alternate possibilities. Now, we often make mistakes in positions we don't list alternate possibilities because we didn't see those possibilities, hence making the mistake. But here, I don't see them either. I think good game by both players.